Gurb Margaret, Mr. Long, you've been very helpful, and thank you for your patience for sticking with us. Just have three issues I want to deal with, three areas. The first is you spoke a number of times about the uniqueness of this sale and its different characteristics from, say, other sales. So I just want to maybe very quickly, and we're under a bit of time pressure now, so I'll be as concise as I can, just for you to help me understand the uniqueness of this arrangement. You accepted earlier 4.3 of the Comptroller's report talks about that the standard sales strategy was not adhered to here. There was a deviation from the standard sales strategy, so you accept that. Yeah. Would that be unusual in terms of, it would be unusual?
Most loan portfolio sales follow a two-round process.
So that would be unusual?
Yeah.
Okay, and then that there was no tender competition for your own appointment.
Yeah.
You said that there was 50 loan sales that you were involved in. So of those 50 loan sales, would that be unusual?
Yeah.
When you're dealing with a state body?
I didn't mean to say 50 loan sales. I meant approximately 50 kind of sell-side processes that I've been involved in.
Okay, but with the fact that there was, you're dealing with a state body, would it be unusual then that there was no tender competition for your appointment? That would be unusual as well. Okay, that you did not carry out valuations or you weren't asked to do that. Yeah. Was that unusual in the context of the work that you were being asked to do?
Not necessarily, and I did try and kind of cover this point earlier.
So that that's okay. The one bid round, was that unusual?
Yes.
That was unusual as well. And the fact that there is now 2 criminal investigations into this loan sale would be pretty unusual as well, wouldn't it? So when you talked about this being a success earlier, I'm not quite sure how you would characterise a failure, but it doesn't read like a success to me.
What I meant was that it was a success insofar as NAMA's objectives for the transaction was achieved, and that we ran a competitive process with competitive tension right until the end.
I'm going to come to that now as well.
Because just to finish off, Deputy, I beg your pardon, and that we achieved a sale in excess of NAMA's reserve price. So, if you like, notwithstanding all of the unusual features that you just referred to, the portfolio was sold in excess of NAMA's reserve price. I would argue that.
And this maybe comes back to this, that the end justifies the means, or vice versa. But we'll come back to that in a second. The second issue I want to deal with is you said a number of times that there was a level playing field in terms of the process for all bidders.
That's what we were trying to achieve, yeah.
Yes, but you said that there was a level playing field. In your view, there was a level playing field.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, sorry. I wasn't aware at the time of the, and this is a point that Deputy Connolly made earlier, I wasn't aware at the time of that the sale process was underway quite how much time PIMCO had already spent on this transaction in advance. So I acknowledged that that did confer an advantage, probably conferred an advantage on PIMCO, but we were trying to maintain a level
playing field. So you've acknowledged that. So what I'm trying to understand is that would you accept then that maybe it wasn't as level as you would have liked it, or you suggested earlier?
Yes. So it wasn't as level as I thought it was at the time. That's correct.
Are you aware of the PIMCO letter that was read into the record of this committee last week, I think it was, by the chairperson?
Yes.
Did you read that?
Yes.
Were you surprised when you read that from PIMCO's perspective in as far back as April 2013 that Mr. Tuvie Keenan, who worked for Brown Rudnick, Mr. Ian Coulter, who worked for Toons, Mr. Frank Cushnan, who was a member of the NIAC, were you surprised to read that they, in fact, had approached PIMCO? That they had approached them on the basis that we are aware of the potential here of a portfolio that could be put together. They talked about concerns of the government of the north of Ireland and so on. But in fact, that they were the partners, they were the stakeholders that approached PIMCO. Was that news to you?
It wasn't news to me. I was aware of that before I saw this letter.
Well, when did you become aware of that? Because we weren't aware of that, so I'm just, how did you become aware?
I only saw this letter very recently.
But the first time we became aware of the April 2013 approach by these individuals, the PIMCO, was when we received this letter. If you're saying you were aware of that before you read this, how did you become aware of it?
Was April 2013 not mentioned in NAMA minutes, and that's the thing we had.
No, that's contested. No, but that's NAMA.
It was mentioned before.
No, this is very relevant. That's NAMA. I'm talking about Mr. Long when he says he became aware of it before we knew. Because we had to tease out this April 2013 date in the minutes.
Deputy, just to be clear as to the question you're asking me when I became aware of...
When did you become aware that Mr. Tuvi Keenan, Ian Coulter, basically that Brown Rudnick Tunes and Mr. Cushionhan approached PIMCO in April 2013?
Yeah, I was aware, perhaps I didn't consider the question carefully enough. I've been aware for some time that PIMCO and Brown Rudnick and Tunes had been working together on this transaction, and I think this kind of ties into...
But I'm specifically asking about the April 2013 date because the actual issue of a loan sale portfolio wasn't considered by NAMA until much later.
Yes, indeed.
So what I'm saying is...
if you're asking about the April 13 date, then I believe that I was only aware of it when I saw this letter.
Okay, and when you saw that then, so now you are now aware that these parties, if you like, were working together to approach PIMCO. Did that cause you any concern?
Well, by the time I knew...
No, I'm not saying but when you found out. I'm not talking about retrospective. When you found out.
When I found out that Brown Rudnick, Tunes and Mr. Cushionhan had been working together in April 13, yes, I was surprised about that.
Surprised? And were you concerned?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because
but you were never made aware of this, and I'm going to get back to this later.
Mr. Cushionhan, given Mr. Cushionhan's role on the NIAC, then sure.
And we're concerned as well. But my point, and we'll get to this in a second in terms of the conflicts of interest as to when you were informed of this, because if you were concerned and surprised, it would have been valuable information for you to have at some point during the process. Sure. Yeah, sure. You accept that. 417, if we get that up in the CNHE's report. Strict confidentiality was to be maintained and potential bidders were to be prohibited from contacting the debtors. Yeah. So I would imagine then one of your concerns is that we now know from the Controller's report that Mr. Cushionhan actually had an association with 50% of the debtors of the portfolio. This was something also that you weren't made aware of, or were you made aware of?
No.
You were not made aware of that?
No.
And you're the loan sale advisor, and you weren't made aware of that?
Yeah.
And does that concern you?
Well, I mean, it concerns me now that, in fact, being aware of it, that arrangement concerns me, yes. Yes,
but you see, you're aware of it now, and lots of what you say when you come in mirrors what you said when you knew what was happening in real time. You're still sticking to the view that it was a competitive process, there was no difficulties, and if I can refer you also to page 82 of the CNHE's report, because you're a professional, I've no doubt that you tried to do your job, and you did do your job to the highest standard. You can only do your job based on the information that you're given.
Sure.
You can only provide evidence or provide papers and letters to NAMA based on the information that you have. Would that be correct?
Yes.
So if you look at page 82, on the 2nd of April you provided a letter to the board of NAMA, or to NAMA, in its professional advisory judgment, that's you and your organisation, given NAMA's objectives, the process had been appropriate. But the process had become compromised by virtue of Mr. Cushionhan's involvement with Brown, Rudnick and Tunes, and then their transfer from PIMCO to Cerberus. So given that you did not have that information, you are then basically confirming that the process had been appropriate, but you were acting blind. Would you accept that?
Well, I mean, I think blind is putting it a little bit strongly, but we weren't...
Well, how would you characterise it if you didn't have the information? You were hardly clear in your information.
With incomplete information,
Yes.
Yeah. Forgive me, so what was your next question? So
it was incomplete. What I'm saying is that you had a professional responsibility to ensure the integrity of the process, the fact that it was transparent. We go back to what I was saying earlier in my earlier remarks, where it set out the terms of reference. You had to make sure it was transparent. You then, on signing off on this very close to the end on the 2nd of April, the process had been appropriate. Would you still hold that view, given what you now know about the conflicts of interest? Would you still say the process had been appropriate, that it had not become in any way compromised?
I mean, NAMA's concern with...
I'm asking, not NAMA, you.
Can I just reflect for a moment before answering that question? It's a very difficult question to answer. I guess what I'm, Deputy, what I'm concerned about in hindsight, and where, if you like, the process may have been inappropriate. I think this is where you were heading with your question. Was to the extent that Mr. Cullinane had been involved with Tewins and Brown Rudnick, could he ever be totally separated from them? Is that the point?
That's
you're
one
trying to
part of
make?
it, but you also then were involved in a number of exchanges with NAMA in relation to the letter of assurance that they were looking from Cerberus, and that was in connection to their association with Brown Rudnick and Tewins.
Yes.
At that point, were you aware of the conflicts of interest with PIMCO, the fact that there had been a success fee with Brown Rudnick, Tewins and Frank Cullinane? When you were asked to give that advice,
We weren't.
We weren't.
At that point, we weren't aware that while they're advising PIMCO...
And that's pretty valuable information not to have when you were trying to advise them on their letter of assurance. Had you been advised at that point that Brown, Rudnick and Tewins were actually in a relationship with Frank Cullinane, that Frank Cullinane had an association with debtors, which NAMA knew, so NAMA knew this, why did they not share that information with you? Or not? Well, I can't ask you to speak for them, but in your view, that's valuable information not to have been shared with you.
Yes, I accept that.
Well, it's not just accepting it, it's not just valuable information. They were trying to retrofit essentially the response from Cerberus, and that's what your communication was, to try and line up the ducks and make sure everything was okay. They had the full information, you did not have the full information. And yet you were very handsomely paid, very well paid, to make sure that this process was transparent, which is, we're trying to get to the bottom of failures in process.
Sure.
So you're accepting there was failures in process.
Well, I'm accepting that that at the time that we provided our letter on the 2nd of April 2014, we were not aware that Cerberus's advisors, when they were advising PIMCO, had been closely associated or had been involved with Mr. Cullinane.